Interview at UATV English, former Commander-in-Chief of American Army Europe, General Hodges, is with us tonight. A privilege, sir. Thank you so very much for joining.
Well, thank you very much for the privilege of participating.
My first question, of course, Kursk incursion. But, let me put it straightforward. If you would be in charge of the operation right now, in a state it is now, what would you do?
Well, I think that the decision by the General Staff to launch this counteroffensive in the Kursk direction was a very good idea. And it still is delivering positive effects for Ukraine. It has created a dilemma for the Kremlin. It is forcing them to commit resources that they don't have elsewhere. And it's also, we're going to get to see whether or not the North Korean troops are what kind of effect they have. But the main thing it did is that I believe it has changed the narrative that somehow Russian victory is inevitable, that Russia can't be defeated. This counteroffensive, I think, changes that narrative.
Yeah, well, I've heard people saying Russia is a juggernaut of sorts, which is not a paper tiger, maybe, or maybe not. But how are we doing in Kursk? Any insights, maybe?
Well, of course, I can't tell for sure without access to Ukrainian intelligence, and so I would not expect to have that kind of insight. But it seems to me that after almost 4 months now, Russia still has not been able to eliminate the Ukrainian bridgehead. They have not been able to eradicate this threat inside Russia, and it does create a real problem for the Kremlin. Do they leave it there? Do they commit resources to it? Do they keep doing what they're hoping to do in the East? I think this is still an appropriate operation for the Ukrainian General Staff.
Thank you so very much for that answer. Well, let me ask you a question about American politics, which is Fox TV host Pete Hegseth might be hosting Pentagon shows for now. Mr. Hegseth as a defense secretary of the United States of America. How likely this figure to be confirmed by the Senate, you think, General?
Well, that's an important question, and it's a question that I have also. As you know from your question, our system the Constitution requires Senate consent on people who the president wants to nominate.
Right.
And so this will be an early test for the new Senate Majority Leader, Senator Thune, a Republican, on whether or not they will require confirmation, or will they sort of roll over and allow the administration to bypass the confirmation process to get their people in place. This is an important test. I hope that the Senate will do their duty, their constitutional duty. Of course, every president has the prerogative to nominate who they want for their team. And there's every election, there's always some controversial nominee that is going to meet resistance. So that's not new. What seems new this time is the number of nominees like Mr. Hegseth, who don't on the surface appear to have the normal traditional qualifications. And so this is going to be important for the Senate to do its duty.
All right. Well, you live in Germany, so with all this Scholz, die Totenhosen and political turmoil, how likely do you think then in Germany that Friedrich Merz will become a new chancellor then?
Well, I think the polling indicates that the CDU and the CSU will win the election, and so that Mr. Merz will become the Bundeskanzler after that, when a new coalition is formed. So at this point, just based on polling and German media, I would say that's the most likely scenario.
It is, and I think this is a good scenario for Ukraine. What do you say, General?
Well, certainly Mr. Merz has been very clear in recent months in his support for Ukraine, and in speaking to the Kremlin, saying that if they did not stop what they were doing, that he would authorize the use
Right.
of Taurus, for example, by Ukraine. So these are very positive indicators. And I also think that Mr. Merz is the kind of leader that could, number one, help lead Germany to a much stronger, more forward-leaning position with regards to
Absolutely.
security and stability in Europe.
Well,
I don't think he's intimidated or easily swayed by Russia. And he might even be the guy that could convey to President Trump that Europe is prepared to do what it needs to do, but to ask the Americans, don't turn your back on Europe. We still
right.
need American nuclear deterrence. We still need American support and leadership. But Mr. Merz is the kind of guy I think that could bring along a lot more European support, certainly German support.
Right. Well, just some decisiveness could do. I think we can use some decisiveness, that's for sure, in politics. Well, if I will make a statement now, please say if you agree with it or not. Do you think that South and North Korea's war is imminent?
I don't think it's imminent. I think that North Korea is testing South Korea,
No, for sure.
and of course, this is the way it is. When you don't respond, when deterrence fails, it almost always leads to conflict. And so, I think the United States, with our allies in the Indo-Pacific region, have got to make it clear that we will, in fact, defend our South Korean allies. But we got to figure out a way to do this. And I'm surprised that we haven't been more direct with the North Korean side. That we have not taken the steps necessary to stop them from what they're doing. Now, of course, North Korea is already sanctioned. It's not like there's more sanctions that would affect their behavior. But North Korea's only friend in the world is Vladimir Putin. And so, in my view, if we help Ukraine defeat Russia, it further isolates Kim Jong-un, and I think would weaken his ability. Not only would he no longer be receiving
Right.
technology from the Russians, he would also be further isolated. And I think that's how we have to think strategically.
Absolutely. The only North Korean friend in the world, Vladimir Putin, is obviously taking for granted all Trump's peace efforts, let's call it that way, by escalating in Ukraine. Every night we're in Ukraine here and see that. All right, so such an attitude is obviously turning Trump from a possible ally, so to say, of the Kremlin to an almost certain adversary. And Putin openly neglects Trump's direct warnings about significant American force, that's what Trump said, in Europe. The Russian dictator seems not to care much, if at all, as a commanding general of the American Army Europe. So militarily, that significant force Trump is talking about, how significant is it anyway today?
Well, you've got real American capability alongside the capabilities of our allies from all over Europe and Canada. So there is enough land force to defeat any Russian attack. What we need more of is air and missile defense. I mean, if Russia were to launch air and missile strikes against, say, Lithuania or Poland, the way they do against Ukraine, I'm not sure that we have enough capability to adequately protect all of the critical infrastructure or the population. Now, the other part of this, Russia's already at war with us. I mean, they think in terms of being at war.
Right.
It may not be in the traditional kinetic sense, but they use every other capability, from disinformation to criminal activity to attacking cyber attacks or sabotage, interfering with elections, et cetera. I think the sooner that we start thinking in the same terms, the sooner we will be able to take the steps necessary, to have the policies necessary to inflict pain on the Russians so that they stop what they're doing. But we're not that yet.
Very nicely put, inflicting pain. But so, do you think that Putin is just bluffing when saying he can go to war with NATO and win?
Well, I think that this is part of what they do.
Right. Well,
They talk about nuclear weapons all the time because they see it affects how we act. It causes us to self-deter. Um, and I think that the Kremlin sees um, if there's a likelihood of some sort of negotiated outcome with Ukraine, they obviously are trying to create the facts on the ground and create a context that gives them the best possible advantage, and to cause Western leaders to think, oh my God, we could end up in a conflict with Russia. We don't want that. Bad luck for Ukraine. I mean, I think this is all part of the process.
last question for tonight. So, Ukrainian media, well, a noticeable part of it, let's put it that way, is exemplary. A wrongdoing when criticizing indiscriminately someone they should be doing all possible to turn into an ally. And this is especially stupid, if you ask me, if this someone is the president of the United States. Not a, but the president by now already. So, former Commander-in-Chief of American Army Europe, General Hodges, what do you think? What could be your advice to my colleagues, the Ukrainian media journalists?
Well, first of all, remember that the job of media is not to create allies or create policy. The job of media is to shine a bright light and report the facts, to offer analysis so that populations and governments can make their own decisions. So it's not the job of the media to turn Mr. Trump into an ally of Ukraine. It's report the facts. That's an essential part of any democracy, is a media that reports the facts. Now, that also means that criticisms, which are part of the process, need to be based on facts. And you're right, the election is over. All of us, regardless of how we voted, the election is over, and so we need to accept. And I have accepted the outcome of the election, but I also will continue as a free citizen of the United States, continue to challenge policies and behavior that I think are inappropriate or wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that. I just feel the absolute need for some of my colleagues to watch this very interview and to understand that some facts can be placed this way or the other first, or the otherwise, but it's the fact. Donald Trump is going to be a president. It doesn't mean you don't have to criticize them, but the way you criticize them could be either favorable for Ukraine or it could be bad for Ukraine. That's what I meant. So, thank you so very much anyway for your time and for your absolute expertise in the questions that we just discussed. Thank you so very much. I hope to talk to you soon.
I'd like that. Thanks again for the privilege.
Thank you. Goodbye. Former Commander-Chief of American Army Europe, General Hodges, answered our questions at UATV English.